We have another magical episode about breath. My dear friend Sam joined us, and I have to say that I've been talking about breath, been a breathwork facilitator, but this one tickled on a way that I can't even imagine because Sam gave us his entire six-step breath process with the acronym BREATHE or breath that maps this out in a way that makes it tangible, feasible, and easy to do while navigating, giving ourselves the most important, powerful tool that we have at our disposal. And we broke down so many topics. Sam has been in this industry empowering people and helping people step into their greatest power for a long time. He's written 7 books. And so we talk about recognizing and avoiding spiritual bypassing, which involves using beliefs to justify behavior. And I might have felt a little bit called out. Engaging in shadow work by acknowledging and exploring your emotions and what actually means and not terms that we throw around. How to use the tickle test to identify the truths that resonate with you. And he breaks down the breath, how to use it to empower yourself, and so much more. I really, really enjoyed this episode. And Sam is a master. And the way that he articulates it is my favorite way, which means give me the thing that give me the tool that let me use it right away. And breath is that thing that we take for granted until the reason or the moment we need it the most. And it's one of the most powerful tools that we have in our arsenals to get clarity, to connect with ourselves, to even use it to find clarity in sticky or hard situations. And so I'm really excited to share this episode with you. So without further ado, let's get into the show with Sam. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. And today I am stoked. I am honored to have an incredible man. This gentleman and I connected online a couple years ago. We've talked for a while, and we've been working hard to get this show scheduled and rescheduled around. And I think the timing is so beautiful and so impeccable because we get to also celebrate the birth of a baby for him. And the baby that is coming out happens to be one of my favorite babies to be born into the world, which is understanding how to use the power of a tool that we all have that we take for granted. And the moment we don't have it anymore, we'll beg for it back, which is breath. And so this incredible gentleman lives in Santa Cruz, California, is a beautiful, beautiful man on a white background that you can pop in front of me, and just here to share his wisdom, his nuggets, and all of that magic. And so welcome to the show, Sam.
Thank you so much, George. I appreciate the incredible introduction, and it's an honor to be here, and I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us.
Yeah, man, I love it. I'm so stoked. And I was actually sharing with you before the show how I had a nervous breakdown today for like a good hour. And, everybody on my show is pretty used to me being out with all of my truth and all of my stuff. And so everything's good. But when riding the emotional roller coaster of life, sometimes overwhelm comes in. And I feel like overwhelm is this feeling that we have to get used to because it's really just flexing a muscle. But it's one of those things that even when I get it, I forget the power of simple tools that I have. And it's so incredibly exciting that you are naming your brand new book. What is it? Overcome the Overwhelm.
Yeah.
And I was like, great, of all days to be here. And so I asked you before the show and we started talking. And so you're like, oh, I have a book coming out and I have a 6-step process for overcoming overwhelm. I'm like, well, take me to church, brother. Take me to church. So I'm ready to listen.
Let's do it. Thanks so much. Yeah, there's a huge backstory that I'd love to get into after this. But for now, the book is called Overcome the Overwhelm. The first half to really 3/4 of it just came through me in like 2 weeks after a trip to Bali earlier this year, coming back in January or coming back right before Christmas, and then just journaling and writing. And then this book just came through. And what came through as like the framework and the foundation of the book is the 6-step breath process. And the word breath is an acronym. And this is something that I've been working on for myself, I'd say, for years, but really more intentionally in the past year when my life imploded last year and I didn't see it coming. And I really got deep into the subconscious mind. And I started seeing a lot of different teachers, whether it's Dr. Joe Dispenza or Neville Goddard, just a lot of the different teachers we'd see about quantum physics and subconscious mind. I just went deeper and deeper and deeper. And I started to create a formula that was working for me, and I was sharing it with my clients, and it was working with them so much. So when this book was coming out of me, I didn't really have like too much structure to that formula I was using last year, but the structure just came in writing the book, and that's the breath process. So The acronym is breath. The B stands for breathe to slow down. The R is relax to feel. The E is energy to reveal. The A is accept to surrender. And the T is transform into empowering beliefs. And the H is habits to integrate. And here's the thing, what I love so much about these 6 steps is this is noticing how we feel in the moment. Because I'm an integration coach and I help people that are working with not only ayahuasca, but bufo is one of the main medicines I help people to integrate into everyday life. And that is a big, profound game changer, right? And it's like, what do we do next? And I also speak to corporate audiences, and I find out at the end of the day, whether you're just like a busy professional that's looking to just clear your mind and not necessarily go so deep with psychedelics, or if you are going all the way down the rabbit hole, what we all want to feel is more clear moment to moment. And what I noticed within myself and a lot of my clients when this started to come online was like, we'll do all the things in the morning. For me, I live out by the beach, so I have a little breathwork, meditation, ocean plunge routine that is like my church, like I have to get that in. It's just amazing for me. But then what happens during the day? You have these different things that you do in the morning, then the daily stressors come and we forget to breathe. We forget that emotions are energy in motion, and that our body has a 90-second physiological response when we experience that energy. So everything that I'm teaching within this framework, it's not like groundbreaking new stuff. It's just like packaged in a way that is so simple. And I feel like my secret sauce really is taking these big, complex ideas and concepts and breaking it down to be accessible and practical so we can apply it on an everyday basis. So with the 6-step breath process, it's like, oh, I'm feeling this overwhelm because I have all these different things, travel plans, have to take care of the kids and line up all of this, right? That's what you're experiencing right now, George, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And I get it, man. It's not lost on me that the cosmic joke of how overwhelmed and stressed I've been in writing this book and being like, okay, so you want to be the overcoming overwhelm guy? We're going to send you a little bit more stress and overwhelm. And I'm not perfect. The person that acts like they're perfect, or calls themselves a guru or anything like that, that's when I'm going to run and go the other way, right? It's a practice. And really at the end of the day, when we can notice that stressor, or maybe it's grief, it's sadness, it's anger, whatever it is, and be like, okay, I'm going to feel this and I'm going to run through these 6 steps that are broken down 3 simple themes. And that's breathe, feel, think intentionally. So that is the 6-step breath process in a nutshell. And I'll turn it back over to you.
I love that. And it's so funny because I feel so called out as somebody who facilitates breath work and has done so much of it that I fall into the Solomon's paradox trap all the time. And that was this morning. And just for everybody, I'm flying to San Diego tomorrow to give a keynote. And by the way, the first thing I packed was my bathing suit because I do my morning ritual with Montana cold bare feet and ice water. But I'm really excited to get into the power of the ocean tomorrow afternoon and nice 50-degree water in Southern California and do an ice bath there and have that healing energy. And I'm like, in all of that, the same thing happened to me this morning, and you nailed this. And I think that this is so powerful. I even fall into this trap a lot where I have access to all these tools that I teach, and then even when I get overwhelmed, I'm the first one to forget that they're there. And I'm like, oh, it can't be that easy. It can't be that simple, right? And so instead I FaceTime Ashley, and everybody knows Ashley. And this morning I was like, and she's like, have you breathed? And I'm like, oh yeah, that thing, right? And then all of a sudden, things start to dissipate. And I even love your breakdown of this. The only question I have is it's breathe to slow down, relax to feel, energy to reveal, accept to surrender. And what was the transform?
Into empowering beliefs.
Oh, into empowering beliefs, and then habits to integrate. Yeah. And I feel like, for me, and the thing that I had one question about what you said before I go on. When you said the physiological response was 90 seconds, can you break that down for me and for everybody listening?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, and it's funny because I went through a yoga teacher training and a breathwork training, two different ones, a couple years ago, and neither of them mentioned this. And I'm a student of this stuff, and you don't really hear about it too much. And I feel like this is something that our communities should be talking about. Dr.
Mhm.
Jill Bolt, she's a neuroanatomist at, I believe it's Harvard. Harvard. I can't speak this morning.
Harvard. Yeah, yeah. For me, it would be Harvard. For me, it
Harvard.
would
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah,
Harvard. For all
exactly.
the
Yeah.
smart people, it's Harvard.
That's the Freudian slip, right? Being like, yeah, hard. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so Dr. Jill Bolt, she delivered an amazing TED talk. I think it was some years ago. And basically, I think it's called Stroke of Genius. I can send you the link if you want
I
to put
would
it in
love
the
that.
show
I'll throw it
notes.
in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. But basically, what she discovered is that our bodies has a 90-second chemical response when we experience an emotion. And no, coupling this with emotions being energy in motion, we know that the emotions are designed to move through us instead of freezing and constricting. Can we give ourselves just a couple of minutes? And like you said, like, feeling called out, I'm constantly calling myself out. Like just yesterday, I was hovering over the trash can, snapping past pistachios. Like I have this nice little cupboard. It's got a good stand. It's like a good trash can, it's not like all like flies coming out or anything like that. But after a couple of minutes of just like cracking these pistachios and feeling like I earn them because I have to work for them because I'm cracking for them, then tossing them in my mouth, then tossing the shells, and I get in this little rhythm, right? You know what I mean?
Yep.
I'm like, what am I doing? If I would have just like, it took a couple of minutes to just go through these 6 steps, then I wouldn't just be numbing myself and distracting myself from feeling these emotions, and I could let them pass through me versus get stuck in the body. And the other thing to mention too, like, because we didn't really unpack all the steps, the third one, energy to reveal. So basically it's like, okay, I'm feeling this stress. I, as Sam, I'm going to go over to the cupboard and get the pistachios. Okay, I'm tossing these in my mouth. Or instead, you can be like, oh, I'm feeling this. Let me sit down. Let me breathe to now slow down, shift from that fight or flight to rest and digest. I'm going to relax into it and feel what's coming to the surface. Now, the E, energy to reveal. This one's all about getting curious. Okay, so what is this energy coming through? What is it here to show me? What is a lesson? Because if I don't actually find a lesson, then it's going to just keep coming in stronger and more and more. And that perfectly dovetails into the A, accept to surrender, because this is when we're like, no, give me those pistachios. I don't want to see this thing right now, right? Or I don't want to feel it. So it's like, okay, let me accept this. And that's why the first 4 steps and the bulk of this whole process is shadow work. I have a gripe with toxic positivity of just like, feel good, just feel good all the time. And it's like, no, you're just stacking more unprocessed stuff onto your nervous system. Like,
Mm.
do these 4 steps, give yourself that 90 seconds, a couple of minutes, breathe through it, and then realize that after that energy is moving through you, what stays with you is the story. It's not the actual feeling. It's a
Mhm.
story that you're telling yourself.
Mm. God, that tickles so much. Like, I'm going to tie this for people listening because this has been a recurring theme for 450 shows. But one of my favorite scripture statements that I used on myself was that anxiety was energy lacking clarity,
Mm.
right? It was all this energy with nowhere to go. And so I feel like I was a Marine, right? So I tell everybody, like, I only understand 3 colors, right? Black, white, and pink. Other than that, we ate them. But for me, I need things simple. And so the analogy that I tell myself is like when those feelings come and that 90 seconds is there, if I just keep hitting those pistachios or keep going to those food, it's like my car is sending me a check engine light. And instead of me just reading it and being like, oh, my windshield wiper fluid's low, I ignore it. And then I might realize that my engine oil was out and I just let it seize and it takes over my entire nervous system. Right. And
Mhm.
so that space, and I can't wait to watch that TED talk, is incredible about creating that pause to really just allow it. And I have a question too about this because your 6 steps are incredible, but I think for me, one of the biggest breakthroughs was also recognizing that when I go to breath and when I go to those tools, it's not because I'm trying to get somewhere. I'm trying to get back in here. Like it's
Mhm.
not a checked box. Like there's not this like, oh, I'm going to do these 6 steps in the next 5 minutes. It's like, okay, it's really utilizing them or any of that space or capacity to create space. Would you feel like that's fair?
Yeah, 100%. And that was the point that I didn't close a loop on earlier about like you can do all the things in the morning and have your different mindful or spiritual practices. But if at the end of the day you're not aware of how you feel moment to moment, it's kind of like, what's the point? So really, this isn't about like checking any boxes or being like, oh, let me do the 6 step breath process. Like if we're building new habits and behaviors and routines, checking a box of doing all these things, it's really just a way to cultivate moment to moment awareness, because everyone's about moment to moment awareness, but they're like, how do you get there? I signed up for some challenge by Brandon Epstein. Do you know him?
Mm-mm. No, I haven't heard him.
He'd be a great guy for your podcast too. He wrote an amazing book that came out, I think, last fall called Program to Fail. He does a lot of NLP type stuff, but anyway, and works with athletes. He's a really cool guy. I did one challenge he had where this isn't anything new or anything, but like every 3 hours or so, set an alarm and check in with yourself of how do you feel, and do it every day for a couple of weeks. And I noticed that every time that alarm went off, but right before it went off, I was just thinking or feeling about how I felt. And I was like, okay, like I've been saying that I have moment to moment awareness, but now like I know I do, right? And that's the big question. Like, how do you build that? And the 6 step breath framework is a perfect way to build that. Just realizing like what are your vices? For me, it's food. It's specifically pistachios. And when we start to, well, yeah, go for it.
Oh no, I'm like me too, except it's not pistachios. It's everything I shouldn't be eating that made me weigh 100 pounds heavier a couple years ago. It's the chocolate,
Yeah.
the sugar, right? The comfort food. So I love that. Keep going. I just wanted to, I'm like, me too.
Yeah, I mean, pistachios when I'm being good, put it that way. I just had, 3 days of pretty much being on the couch and watching the Hunger Games, all four of them, and being like, wow, I don't remember these. And this is like why people are always talking about like V for Vendetta or The Matrix or whatever in terms of like propaganda from the movies. And I'm like, this one is so clear cut. Why don't people talk about this one more? Anyways, yes, I had one of those 3 day things this past weekend. And what I've been struggling with recently is I have so much output from like the book and getting back
Mhm.
in my body and working out and getting back into surfing and different things like that, where like by the time I'm done, I'm just like, ugh. And that's the thing that I'm working on right now, to have more of a balance. So I don't just, I'm not like a hamster on a wheel making some progress. And then I go back to like, okay, now I just got to veg out because I just have had so much. And that usually doesn't happen. Usually it happens for me like every 3 weeks or so. But I'm just coming off of one of those a few days ago. But what helps me get back into that, going to the steam room, going to the sauna, getting into the cold plunge, getting into the ocean, going to HIIT class at a heated studio or hot yoga, Bikram, all of these things. It's like, okay, whole pattern interrupt. Now I'm getting back on track. But now I just have to make sure that I don't overdo it, because it's when I
Yeah.
overdo it that puts me back at that place.
Oh yeah. Well, this seems like a perfect segue because you said something earlier where you're like, "Oh, you want to be the guy that helps everybody overcome the overwhelm." Well, let's throw you into the fire. And one of the things I've been reminded of every morning, especially in my prayer, it's like, one of my friends reminded me is like, when you ask for something, you're going to get it. You just also have to recognize you're going to be prepared before you receive it so you can have it. And I know for you personally, and we've shared a lot of stuff that we both have similar experiences with life and shambles and everything else there. And one of the things that I respect so much, and I appreciate you saying this so much, is when you're like, I'm not the guru, like I'm one of you. Like these are tools that we all get to use, tools that we all get to practice, and us included, right? And one of my favorite things about even how you've articulated these steps down is that I find the power and the simplicity, especially like making an acronym around breath, is that when those triggered states happen, the first thing that goes out the window is our thinking,
Mhm.
right? And so even when we know it's like, oh, I can do this, I can do this, when that feeling is there, depending on the constraint of that feeling or how intense it is, that thinking also goes out the window because our sympathetic nervous system is driving, right? And so one of my favorite quotes, and I know you'll appreciate this, but a shaman said this to me, I don't know, like 10 years ago, and he said, a student says I already know, and a master says thanks for the reminder. And I feel
Mm,
that from you, and I genuinely appreciate that, because it makes me feel safe knowing that none of us are advocated from any of this. It's really building a relationship with these things. And so I'd kind of love for you to share kind of like the backstory of like how we got here, so everybody understands that like this is not a tool that you pick up and you throw on the shelf in your garage. It's like, hey, you got to have it in your toolbox, and no matter who you are or where, like we still get to use them. But I'd kind of love for you to share why this is so present for you, and also why it's so powerful coming from you.
that's beautiful, George. Thank you so much for all of that. But including the not but and including the quote. Thanks for the reminder. I haven't heard that. Well, it was from a shaman that was given to you, but yeah,
Yeah.
that is incredible. You know, sometimes I find myself in conversation with another person, be like, yeah, I know, you know, and then I'm like, kind of like Michael Singer's work, like The Witness or
Yep.
IFS, that type of work,
Yep.
be like, no, that's not what I meant to say, you know, but like it still comes out like, yeah, you know,
Oh
but
yeah, it's one of the ones that I like as the semantics of language and the NLP in me too. It's even when like people say to me like, "Oh, I love you," or like, "Oh, I appreciate you so much." I'm like, "Oh, I know." I'm like, "Oh, wait, cancel. Thank you so much." Right? Like even because it's so sneaky. It's even how I've reflected gratitude, reflected love back into me, and it's just this easy thing now that I have that allows me to be like, wait, I don't know anything, right? Like nothing. And quite frankly, the more that I think I know, the less I realize I know. And the gap for
yeah,
me learning gets even bigger. And so, yeah, I wanted to share that because you remind me of that. And every time we've spoken, prior to the podcast and there, like I feel that from you. And it makes me feel incredibly safe, because one of the things that's been hard for me in 20 years of being in this work, right, and all these different pieces of work, is like I've felt unsafe many times because of that whole concept of like I feel like I can't relate to you. Like I feel like it can't be that perfect. Like no matter how good we are, like none of us are flatlined. Like when our heartbeat flatlines, we're dead. Like emotions are supposed to be here. And so having somebody who teaches it, but also is like, no, I'm in it too. Like I'm over the trash can with pistachios. I'm over here inhaling them, forgetting. I'm like, oh yes, like one of me. Yes, that makes me feel so much more excited to use these. And so when you were in Bali, where in Bali were you, by the way?
all over. I started in Ubud and then went to Uluwatu.
Oh yeah, yep. I was
Yeah,
just there in September, so I was like,
oh, cool.
I know where you were. I was in Ubud and Chengdu, and then
Can
Uluwatu
do,
for a
yeah.
while. Yeah. And so that was fun. And so how did we get to the birth of the book, right? So this
Right.
last year for you has been this, let's call it a hero's journey. Let's just call it a hero's journey to slay the dragon. The book was born to return to teach the village. And so where did we get to here? Like how did we get here?
Yeah, well, here's the bomb drop. It actually did start with a baby. So a year ago, February 27th, I believe it was in 2023, I was living, and I've only told this story once publicly, and I'm still fleshing out the details in terms of like what I'm sharing. So I'll do my best to kind of just feel into it and
Yeah.
take it slowly, because I want to be respectful of her and all the parties involved,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But at the same time, it's also like my story, and I also know what's being said about me too, which isn't cool. That said, though, a little over a year ago, I was dating this woman, and that's around the time you and I connected on the phone. And you mentioned the term bonus dad, which was the first time I heard about it, but I've now heard it a few times since. And she had a daughter, 5, 6 year old or something like that at the time. And so I was kind of stepping into that bonus dad role, and we got into an argument, and then she got in a trauma response and took her daughter and left, and that turned into getting broken up with via text message. Not to get into all the details, I'll try not to, but long story short, after that she told me she was pregnant, and I said, let's work this out. And long story short, she wasn't willing to, and
Mm-hmm.
blocked me from the entire process. I only saw her twice over the course of the pregnancy, each time for about an hour to try to flesh things out. Um, and it didn't go over well. And it was just pushing me away, pushing me away. And finally, after this, after the baby was born, about a day after that, I received a text message from one of her friends with a picture and letting me know it was born. And that was October of last year. And I mean, this is why last year my whole life imploded, really, because I thought I was building a family. I was looking at rings. I was showing her different rings. I thought that's where this was going. And then it was like a bomb dropped, and I never knew the story of the daughter's father, other than what she had told me, and that he wasn't in the picture. And then I reached out to him after the baby was born, and I let him speak first, and his experience with her and how she reacted when she was pregnant with the daughter was almost identical to the experience I had. So all of the gaslighting I had on myself and all the shoulds of me doing this, and as a man and it being a boy, not that it matters if it's a boy or a girl or any of that, but all the conditioning popping up within me was a lot to handle, right? So that was what sent me into diving into the subconscious more. But having that conversation with the father and just seeing, okay, like, this isn't me, this is a repeat thing. And there, it's not like there's nothing I can do about this. And this is where I've questioned my own beliefs and things like that, and spiritually bypassing and all that, and being like, I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to do the right thing because I feel like I should do the right thing. What is my truth in this? And that's kind of what led me to be like, you know what, this is just a toxic situation. I've talked to the father of this child, of the original one, and his life's great 6 7 years later, and I'll be prepared for this when the day comes. That said, that was part of the inspiration to go to Bali in November, and I went there for Kundalini training. I do a lot of work with 5-MeO, Bufa. I've been training with that medicine a long time, just studying it, put it that way for public reference. But I just felt that there was some kind of connection between Kundalini and 5-MeO, and I wanted to go to Costa, but I ended up going to Bali, and I got there, and that ended up being a scam. And it was from, I'm not going to get into the details there, but Bali ended up being a lot of shadow work with me, not to get into all of that. And I made the best of the trip. And then I came back. And while I was out there, Dr. Andrew Huberman put out a podcast about the Pennebaker journaling, expressive writing, which I've done. I learned about that through Eric Godsey over at Fit for Service.
Love Eric.
Yeah, isn't he a great human? Shout out to Eric and FFS. But anyway, so I came home and I started to do the Pennebaker exercise, the journaling, expressive writing, where you write about a traumatic event for 4 days in a row, essentially. And it's the same event that you're replaying over and over. And I did that, and it felt very good, and it felt cathartic. And a friend of mine, reflected back to me last summer. She planted the seed like, hey, I know what your next book should be about, because I've written 5 so far. And she goes, it should be like how you've handled this and like what happened and whatnot. I go, I don't want to talk about that publicly, you know, but she planted that seed. And then at some point, I remembered this movie that I saw years ago with Johnny Depp, and the title Secret Window, where basically, you remember that one?
Yep.
Yeah, this one, it's a messed up movie, but the premise and the idea of like him being an author and writing a fiction book to help him process something was something that always stuck with me, right? So after doing I'm jumping back and forth, but in January when I came back from Bali and I did the expressive writing about the traumatic event for 4 days in a row, I started to watch a masterclass on watch multiple masterclasses on how to write fiction books, because I don't know the first thing about writing fiction books, like saying a scene and the character writing and all that. I'm like, this is intense, but it'll be a fun challenge. So I started to write a fiction book loosely based off the happenings of what went down last year. That way I could process it for myself, and also for the day that my son comes around or whatever. I have here's this,
Mm.
like whatever happened, like there's no reason for anyone to think like I haven't been taking this serious and been doing the work around it that way and for myself. Right. So I started to write that. I got about a week in and I was really jazzed and really like pumped up. And I started writing like differently. It was interesting to see what was coming out of me. It was just creative writing. And it was like, that's interesting. And then all of a sudden, that book got put on pause without me intentionally or consciously choosing it because this other book wanted to come out. And that's the book that I end up writing, Overcome the Overwhelm. So that's the book I have now. That's the backstory of kind of how I got into that type of work, what went down last year, why I started writing. And, I think there's been a big theme for me recently in my world, whether it's friends or clients or whatever, but we make it out like doing the work is hard, it's dense, it's uncomfortable, it sucks, all of this type of stuff. And what I've really adopted is like a game time mentality, being like, you know what? What's the point and purpose of learning about all this stuff, right, on how to take care of our emotional and mental well-being if we're not going to put it to use? So I've gotten really excited around that, being like, screw like all the this is happening to you versus for you. Like, agree with that, and this is happening for you. But what I mean by like, whatever to that is, most people just say that, right? Like, okay, for me to truly adopt a mentality of this is happening for me, let me get excited about this and be like, wow, isn't this interesting? And it's that mentality that has really kept me to not necessarily disassociate and be like, oh, I'm so much bigger than this ego identification as Sam, and all my lives are being played out on this plan, other plans, and all dimensions, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, I am here. And also, so like that's one of the things I've been so passionate about. That's like a yes and to this whole idea of overcoming overwhelm. And that's my story. Thanks for listening.
Oh, brother. First, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and hearing you in it, and also knowing and feeling lots of that and having personal experience. I just applaud you, and I thank you for your vulnerability and sharing it, and even while navigating it, being conscious and present to both sides, and really just taking your time. Like I appreciate it immensely, and I just applaud you for that, because whether it's somebody listening to this who has a similar experience or any levels of adversity as well, like it's a shining example of even what you talk about. Like, it's really not happening to you or for you, it's showing up in front of you, and it's an opportunity, right? And you embrace it and you step into it, and you're a better man for it. I'm a better man for listening to you tell that story. I'm a better person for hearing your emotions and processing it. And really it's a testament to the work, right? And my scripture statement for myself this year is, they're not interruptions, they're invitations. Every
Mm.
time the phone rings, right? Like, if it's showing up in my space, it can't be an accident, right? I believe it's God. Other people believe it's the universe. Everybody has their own, but I also have started to recognize that there are no accidents here. And so even my year is reframing those from interruptions to invitations. And even your book thing, I don't know if you've ever read it, but it tickled my brain. I just finished Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic for the second time, and she wrote Eat, Pray, Love. But Big Magic talks about ideas, and even your book writing process of like how you were in this one, and then this one popped up. It's like an incredible masterclass on even understanding how ideas and how to step into them and how to use them. And I love that, all of that. And so two things that I have to ask though, because I want to unpack this for everybody, because two things that you said that I hear all the time and I know in the world, but aren't talked about often. Can you just give your definition of spiritual bypassing? Because
Ooh.
it's something you say and I know what it means, but I think it's something that's thrown around and not many people get it. So can you unpack that for everybody?
Yeah, and thank you for all that. And
Yeah.
before I do, when I first got into spirituality and all this, there were so many terms that I was just like, "Huh? What?
Yep.
So actually, in my last book, 2 books ago, Soul Life Balance: A Guide to Igniting and Integrating Spiritual Awakenings, there's a glossary of terms for the quote unquote newly activated, and it's like 100 to 150 words. So I think I know this one pretty much verbatim. Spiritual bypassing to me is using your belief system to justify a way of being or behavior based off
Hmm.
that belief system.
Yeah, I love that. It's something that I hear, and something that everybody used to make fun of me when I got out of the military because, like, you speak in acronyms. And I was like, you know what? We maybe had 12 of them. This whole other side of community, I go to Austin and it's like you have to learn a new language when you walk
Yeah.
around Austin, right? Or even when you're down in like Bali and you're like, what did you just say? Huh? What was that? And so I love that definition of spiritual bypass. And then the other thing too is I would love this from you because I actually, you said something, and I've never talked about this before, but shadow work is something that I'm into. I'm massively familiar with, like a lot of my teachers. But it was a term that really, really turned me off for a long time because it made it seem like it like was this thing or this bad thing in this darkness. And I'm like, for me, shadow work is just acknowledging my emotions and being willing to look at them and understand the parts that don't feel like unicorns and rainbows. So that, as our dear friend Carl Jung, who Eric Godsey introduced me to, and by the way, I met Gods the day he was hired at On It, and he
Oh wow.
came in, and I think we were in one conversation, and I just listened for like 8 hours, and I was like, "Who are you? I love you. What is this?" And he just was going to town. But one of the favorite things that he ever shared with me from Carl Jung is that the tips of our branches can only touch up to the height of heaven with how deep our roots touch down into the darkness. And I think Carl Jung used hell. And, for me, that helped me to really understand it. It wasn't that shadows are these things that I don't want or I don't have. We all have shadows the moment it's light out. It's that I just never wanted to look at them. And then I didn't realize they were a part of me. And so I would love to kind of hear your take on like what shadows are or what shadow work is from your lens, just so everybody can pick up their own.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot of buzz terms or people look at like shadow work. I have a old client who messaged me recently, like, do you know anything about self actualization? And I just laughed. To be honest, it was a text message, and I was like, huh? What? Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? And then I looked up the definition. And I'm like, still like what? And it was a similar situation last summer where someone said like they were integrating different medicines and they were doing the work and they're like, yeah, I think I'm ready to start doing shadow work. And I was like, huh? What? And I'm like, wow, like marketers, like I know you're a marketing guy. I come from like a branding positioning background. Like it's brilliant, right? To be like, oh, I'm a shadow work expert or I'm a self-actualization expert, right? But let's sticking to shadow work. Like if you are integrating and you're integrating spirituality into your daily life and you're getting curious and you're saying like opening those doors, that is the shadow work. As soon as you get to a point of like, oh no, I don't want to see that, I'm going to just like deflect that or compartmentalize it and then never go back and open up that box, then that's, you're no longer doing shadow work. Which, side note, I didn't understand the term compartmentalization. I'm just like curious on terms. It's not like when I say I don't understand, it's really like I don't know what self-actualization or compartmentalization is.
Totally.
Like, let's get on the same page, right? But
Mm-hmm.
compartmentalization, I had my good friend Alicia Kay. She's a certified trauma counselor on the podcast to unpack it. And I was like, I just want to hear from you. Like, what is compartmentalization? And we kind of landed on it's good in the moment to help you process, right? If you can't do like the 6-step breath process in the moment or something like that, sure. But the problem is the majority of people, no shame to them, just myself included, like we never go back to open that box. And that's the issue right there.
Yep. 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 And that's something for me. And just so everybody listening too, self actualization comes from, well, one place is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think it's like the third tier at the top. But even for me, compartmentalization, that one got drilled into me 11 years ago in personal development when I was becoming a personal development teacher because I was convinced that I was one way at home and a different way at work
Mm.
and a different way at gym. And they're like, no, 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 no. You're the same. Your subconscious is the same. You're just convinced up here that you're different, but if you put the writing on the wall. And so it's something with me, and like my only intro into trauma work was the fact that I did every step. I went to all the therapies, I did all of it, and it led me nowhere. And I had to start studying myself and doing it and realizing these integrations. And I think you'll appreciate my joke because the check engine light is like my thing. And so someone's like, well, you seem pretty happy now. I'm like, yeah, I don't really have any check engine lights right now. And they're like, so what do you do? And I was like, well, I wake up and I floor my car into the wall as fast as possible. And I find whatever ones didn't turn on. And they're like, what's that? I'm like, that's my shadow work. I'm like, I put myself in situations where if I'm comfortable and I'm good, there's no such thing as like stagnation as a human. We're either like growing or dying, right? And I think it's just finding the parts and pieces that I call it the tickle test that tickle, right? If you say something, like you've said a few things on this podcast to me that tickled, I'm like, oh, gonna unpack that later, gonna journal about that later, right? And then if they don't tickle, I'm like, oh, they're not mine, right? So that's like my tickle test on like how I stay in my shadow work is I just think about them all as check engine lights. And if I wake up in the morning, I'm like, God, the car just started completely fine. It's running great. I'm like, all right, let's floor it. Let's drive down that racetrack and hit that speed bump as fast as possible and see what rattles itself loose. We'll tighten some bolts, right? We'll change the oil and we'll keep going. And so, like I said, Marine and me, I like to keep things simple and I love hearing you unpack all of this. And so, what I would love to do now, because like those 6 steps are so powerful, and even the labels that you put on them in the acronym give so much clarity and weight and gold in like what's happening in like the breath process. And really, it's, in my opinion, when I have those feelings, it's really, my job is not to eradicate my emotions, it's to build a relationship with them so they don't drive and I do. That's how I see, breath for me. And so I would love it if you're open, if you could just kind of like unpack each one of those steps for like a minute or two and just kind of give somebody like a tangible way to see like how they operate or like how they
Yeah.
function.
Yeah, 100%. Before I do, real quick, the tickle test and that analogy was gold. I love that. And it's so, I just want to touch on this real quick because in my men's group last night, this came up and it's something that it always resonates with people. But I had this download once of external family systems. So internal family systems are IFS or parts work. It's basically getting to know the different parts, thought forms, and that make up the totality of your psyche. Just keep it very simple. So if you understand IFS and parts work, this download came through that are more sticky and challenging relationships. Not only are they mirrors, but it's the physical manifestation of our internal parts. And that's what I heard from you with the tickle test. And applying that has been a game changer for me.
Yes. And just so everybody listens, we just finished our event and I introduced everybody to the tickle test, but everybody's on the podcast has heard me talk about it before, but I call it the purple dinosaur test because that's how it was taught to me.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'll tell the story in about a minute, but I was at personal development and I'll never forget this. Like I'm in day 3 of the intro of this 5-day intensive, 18 hours a day, 86 experiential based exercises. Right. And I'm like in my intro, I'm like, no, I got it all together, boom, boom, boom. And then she's like, oh, well, will you lie to people? I'm like, no, I don't. I was like, I never lie to people. I'm honest all the time. And she's like, well, yeah, and you treat people like crap. I'm like, no, I don't. And I'm like, she's just pegging my shadows, like pegging them. And the more she pegs them, the more defensive I get, right? And so then dead middle of it, she looks me dead in the eye in front of 100 people. And she's like, you're a purple dinosaur. And my entire energy in my body changed. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And the whole room went, and I was like, oh no. And then she's like, you lie to people all the time. And I was like, no, and then I just shut up. And I was like, oh, because I only have a reaction in my body if it's true for me. And so everything that she was saying tickled. And that's why I was getting defensive. And then when she called me a purple dinosaur, I'm like, I know I'm not a purple dinosaur. My subconscious knows I'm not a purple dinosaur. So I just kind of laughed. And fast forward, I used it in a keynote like 5 years later. And it was this infamous keynote because I said on stage, nobody has a marketing problem. Everybody has a relationship problem. And some guy in the audience screamed bullcrap very loudly. And George, being George, I was like, sir, stand up. And he stood up and we had this dialogue and then ended up in this conversation. And I happened to ask him a question and I was like, about his relationship. And he said, we're separated. And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, well, fix your relationship and it'll fix your business. And, it ended up being this monumentous occasion. But when I said that, it tickled him so bad that he had to like scream it out. He couldn't even like leave it in. And just to close the story, a year later, he messaged me and he actually did fix his
Hmm.
relationship and the business worked. But that's where the tickle test came from. I just didn't like using purple dinosaur anymore. But that is my barometer for the day. Like even as you're speaking, and I know internal family systems because I had to study it all on my own to try to get better out of my trauma work. And those are the things that it took me years to recognize, that if my body's having a reaction to it, some part of me recognizes it as true for me. And it doesn't mean I need shame or guilt or blame or fault. It just means like, oh, some part of me recognizes truth in that. And if I can recognize truth in that and it causes a reaction on my side, there's probably something for me to unpack in there, or at least be willing to shine a light on and be like, you know what? I will take a peek on that. And so that's a big barometer that I use now every day. So everybody now knows what the tickle test is.
I love that, man. Great story. And it's amazing. The tickle test. I'm going to carry that with me. Thank you. So real quick with the 6-step breath process, it's a lot to remember, right? 6 steps. So that's why I break it down into 3 simple themes. And
Yep.
you experience that emotion, that stressor, whatever it is. You remember that emotions are energy in motion, that the 90-second rule teaching us that our bodies have a 90-second chemical response, a physiological response. So allow that to happen. And these themes are breathe, feel, and think intentionally. So the first 4 steps are the quote unquote shadow work. Very first thing, breathe to slow down. My favorite form of breath work is the cyclic sigh. Dr. Huberman talks about it. He made it famous through the lab at Stanford that ran the test of different breathwork exercises and meditation practices. And they found that just inhaling all the way up through your nose, sipping in a bit more at the top through your nose, exhaling through your mouth, and doing that for 5 minutes a day for 5 days or a week or two, it's going to really teach your subconscious to shift into rest and digest. I'm speaking from experience on the last part. So my recommendation is to do the cyclic sigh. If you are partial to something else like box breathing, whatever else, whatever it is that's going to help you shift into rest and digest. Cyclic sigh, inhaling all the way up, sipping a bit more, exhale. Like it just feels so good. So that's the first step, breathe to slow down, because this is when we're racing and this is when we fire off that text or that email or whatever the situation is. I'm just speaking from my own experience recently, being like with my overwhelm, being like, man, did I really just send that email? I'm better than that. Oh man, I can't believe this old habit from 5+ years ago came up, but all right, now I got to rectify that. Right.
Yep.
Anyways though, so yeah, breathe to slow down. Next thing, relax to feel, relax into it, right? So as you're breathing, slow down, relax into it, notice how you feel. That brings us into the E. The energies are going to reveal something to you. These feelings are energies. These emotions are energies, and they're going to show you something if you can accept and surrender them. They're going to show you a recurring pattern, a theme, something you didn't think about. This is the time to get curious. So accept and surrender is the 4th step. And at that point, once you've surrendered, that's kind of like the shadow work, being like, all right, cool, we're good here, fam. Like we've made this new room for growth. Now is the time for positivity. So transform this energy that you're feeling into an empowering belief. I am statement is great. I don't need to speak about affirmations too much. I feel like we're pretty solid there. The final piece is habits to integrate. And, my whole thing is all about integration. And we could talk so much more about integration, but as it relates to the 6-step breath process, if we just did these first 5 steps, specifically at step 3 of what is this energy revealing to me, now you know something. Like in my situation, recently I sent an email, a couple emails to someone that works with me where they just weren't getting it. And then, that toxicity in my language wasn't there. Or I mean, it was there. Not anything terrible, but it's not how I want to lead as a compassionate leader. Being like, no wonder why I'm calling in more of like of this, just like what George said with the guy in the audience. It's your relationships. I've started to notice, oh wow, this is seeping through in other areas of my life because I'm not practicing what I'm preaching right now because I'm off my game and I'm extremely overwhelmed and I'm taking on way too much. And this is when we expand the 6-step breath process and be like, yes, the 6 steps are good for in the moment, but we can also expand that out on our life as a whole, being like, okay, I need to reevaluate because a lot of things right now are not in flow. And I called all that in and I'm making this way harder than it needs to be because at the end of the day, it is also simple. And that is the habits to integrate. And that's, for me, doing all these things we talked about earlier, like the ocean plunges, getting back in my body. Like I did a HIIT class this morning and man, I don't like those HIIT classes at all. Like I'm the guy in there that doesn't, looks like he doesn't know what he's doing. Then, the next couple days, I'm like, damn, I'm yoked. I feel good, and then I'm like, all right, I just got to get myself back in there. Right. But
Yep.
anyways, though, that's the 6-step breath process.
I love it, and I want to say something just for everybody listening because when we talk about, and this is going to close the loop on shadow work for me as we kind of land this today, but even in what you're sharing, I think for me it's like I tell entrepreneurs all the time, I'm like, when you choose to be an entrepreneur, you're basically choosing to be the Tom Brady of the football world, right? Like you're like, I'm going to go build this vision, I'm going to go do this, and I think that like if we were paying a quarterback $100 million for 5 years and they were our top player and they were throwing a pass incorrectly, we would want to tell them so they would make an adjustment. And when I think about these tools, and especially when you get into your steps of like energy to reveal and accept to surrender, all it really is like, hey, you're winning the game, but you fumbled a few times. And if you make this adjustment or you look at this, you'll be able to not fumble next time, or maybe pick the ball up quicker, right? And it's this constant evolution of growth of like just constantly integrating. And I thank you for also calling out that the most important step in all of this, and another reason I respect you highly, is because any of the tools that you talk about, whether it's breath or Buffo or any of those things, really they're the starting point. It's what comes after and integrating them until they become a part of us that really where the magic happens. And I think that that's the point that is so powerful. But even in your steps, like I've been doing a semblance of something like this for years, but it's so powerful because when you actually allow yourself to breathe and then create that space and you're willing to let that energy reveal and stay in that, you're also breaking subconscious patterns and rewriting neural pathways, and you're building what's called episodic memory. So the more you practice this, the more evidence is stacked up in your subconscious. So when those triggers come in the future, this becomes a default choice or default action rather than the one that you have to think about. But it requires that you go through the process and don't stop in the middle or don't compartmentalize it. And the most important part is really that habits to integrate. And it's not hard. It's not the next 1,000 steps. It's really the next 5 minutes or the next 10 minutes. And really, I love what you do because I do the same thing. I'll go put myself in a ladies spin class and then I'll be dry heaving while these ladies that are 65 are like running laps around me on their bikes. And I'm like, oh. And I used to do like jazzercise classes. I've done Zumba classes, and I'm like, no, anything that gets me into my body and out of my head. But for me, I need it to be so uncomfortable, like, oh, I'm going to be embarrassed in here. So let's go to Zumba because that will just literally drop it all and put this new habit in. But these steps, man, they are absolutely beautiful, and they feel relatively easy. And I also love in reading them and looking at them how you talk about them in the micro, but how they're so applicable at the macro level as well. Like even using these steps over the course of a year of like, what habits do I want to integrate over the year, and breathing into them every day. And all of those pieces are absolutely incredible. And I completely forgot in the intro, and I apologize, to mention your podcast. Can you tell everybody about your podcast, please, real quickly? So like we know about the show before I send them your Instagram too.
Yeah, it's called Soul Seeker. You can find it on Spotify. I've been doing it since 2019. I kind of slowed down. I think we're at 200 episodes. Soul Seeker, Seekr. Yeah.
Seekr with no
Yeah,
er, right?
I'm
So
a Silicon Valley guy, so I had to spell something incorrectly, Yeah.
That's what they all do, man. I was like, you guys think branding's an issue? I'm like, if you can make Lululemon mean something or Reebok mean something when those words don't exist, like you can really make a name mean anything. It's not about the name. Just pick one and go
Yeah.
make it mean something, right? The rest will handle itself.
I actually forgot why I spelt it wrong because it's been so long. So, and hearing you say it, I was like, oh, I remember because before that, I got two cease and desists. My first business back in 2010, I was selling sandals that left an impression in the sand of the words Chico feet. And the women's department store Chico sent me a cease and desist. And then I had like a very low budget brand podcast called Brand Hero back in like 2018 or something, and then I got a cease and desist for that one too. So when I launched Soul Seeker, I was like, I'm just going to spell it wrong. No one can like sue me or anything. And it's just like so ridiculous the things that we sue people over, you know, but that's a whole nother
That
story.
there's a few things you said on the show today that if I engaged with you, we'd be in a
Yeah.
9 hour Joe Rogan conversation of unpacking all of them. And I was like, we'll save that for some behind the scenes podcast someday or some in person fireside because I'll go with you for hours on that one.
I'll come
Um,
out to your studio. We'll do it. I'd be down.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, I think there might be a point where there's a gated podcast that I don't have to release publicly because there's some of these tickles that come out. I'm like, you know what? I want to talk about this. I just want my show to still exist. And so
Yeah.
we'll figure that out. We'll figure that out in the future. And before I ask you the last question, for everybody listening too, Sam is incredible. I'm actually going to be going on his show at some point, but I also besides all of this, I highly recommend that you connect with him on Instagram. And I'm going to give you his Instagram now. We're going to have it in the show notes because he is there. You can get a hold of him. And really, at minimum, if this landed for you, if this tickled, if this supports you, like please do me a favor and support him and just send him some gratitude. Because I know he loves it and he lives in this work. His Instagram's incredible. He's been helping people with this for years. And you can't lose when you have the right reminders around you to be like, thanks for the reminder. Thanks for the reminder. And I think breathing and integration and so many nuggets of what you shared today are the reminders that I look for every day just to have those alarms on my phone and just to remember to breathe and not to rip through that, frozen Uncrustables and then realize I don't even remember eating it. And I was like, where did I go? I was so looking forward to that thing and now it's gone and I don't remember one bite of it. Maybe I should breathe and feel into this and enjoy the moment. And so they apply everywhere. So for everybody, and we're going to have all of this stuff in the show notes because I'm going to go find we'll put the Jill Bolt show in. We'll put the Andrew Huberman one in for writing. The Huberman breath one, I actually listen to that in the morning with Branson.
Mhm.
And so when we get up in the morning, Branson and I, who's 7, my son, we get up, we do red light, and we sit in front of the red light and we do Huberman's breath together. So me and my 7-year-old, and then we go barefoot out in the frozen ground in Montana to see who can make it the longest and who runs in the puddle to get the coldest. And so they're really incredible resources. And so for everybody listening, his Instagram is Sam Kabert. So it's at and then SAMKABERT. And make sure you go check him out, send him some gratitude. And of course, when I go on Sam's show as well, we'll share the episode. We'll share it on our social so you can go hear it and you'll find it easier that way. And so, Sam, my last question is my favorite one, and I'm actually really excited for your answer. Is just imagine we men in blacked everybody listening to the show and they forgot absolutely everything that we talked about, and this moment is the only moment they're going to remember from on. And just in your words, if you could install or tattoo any wisdom on their soul to take with them for the rest of their life, what would your tattoo wisdom be?
I think my tattoo would be Soul Life Balance, the name of my book 2 books ago. And then the tagline underneath that tattoo would be what can you do to feed your soul today?
That is such a good question. And actually, how perfect. What I would love is if you're listening to this personally, and it would fill my bucket and probably Sam's, is if you would like, is answering that question of what can you do to fill your soul today? If you feel called, I would love it if you sent me that and Sam that in a DM so we can read it. And I can also pick up some inspiration for things that I can do in ways that I might be able to fill my soul with some divergent thinking that I haven't thought of. But I would love if anybody listening to this would share that with me and Sam of like, what can you do to fill your soul today? Because I'm going to pick up your nuggets and send them away. If you tell me to go dress up and dance on the beach, I might try it. You give them all to us and we'll figure out what we can do. But I would love to share in the love with that one. And so I love that one, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. It's been fun. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And thank you guys for listening and engaging and hearing the story. So Thank you.
Oh, brother, it was an honor and it was well worth the wait. We let this one marinate in the fridge for about a year, and the flavor was just as good as I thought it would be, and probably tastes better because we let it age with time. So it truly was a pleasure, my friend, and I'm excited to connect more and do all of that. And so thank you so much for thanks for being here. And so for everybody listening, this has been another one of those crazy episodes of the Mind of George show where I believe it belongs in a straitjacket. So I only share the safest parts with you. And so welcome into that world. And so without further ado, I'm going to go hit my list, breathe, pack, get ready to get on an airplane in 8 hours and go jump in the ocean and give a keynote in San Diego. And so, regardless of what you're up to, do me a favor. And I say this on every show, but just remember to take a moment now, just to take a moment in this moment. Pause for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, take a breath. Thank yourself, have gratitude for yourself, appreciate the moment, and don't allow anything you heard today to be shelf-help. The most important thing you can do is if something resonated, if something tickled, just pick it up and try it on for size. But give it some time to work. Use it, play with it, because all of these tools are designed to help us better connect with ourselves. And as my dear friend Alex Sharfin says, most people don't have the business they want because they haven't become the person to run it. And really it's about integrating these tools and making yourself a powerhouse to know that whatever is on the field in front of you, whatever overwhelm comes up, whatever situation or roadblock happens, instead of slashing the other three tires, just call AAA, breathe, change the one you got, feel your way through it, get back on the road and keep going. And so we will see you guys in the next episode, or you'll hear me in your earballs. But either way, we're out.